The first topic we want to mention was how important Moses was. Moses is like on a parallel with Christ. I realize Christ is God and the greatest, but Moses on a parallel. Deuteronomy 18:15, we assume that God or Christ inspired this. Uh, Moses wrote to the Israelites right before they went into the promised land, the Lord or Jehovah, your God, will raise you a prophet like me, that is a prophet like Moses, from your midst, from the brethren. Him you must hear. And then in Acts 3:22 and 23, Peter, in the very first New Testament sermon, says that prophet is Jesus Christ, and that he's the one that the people must listen to, just as Moses prophesied. And we were talking earlier about some other parallels between Moses and Christ. Both of them, when they were infants, the devil, through evil means, has tried to kill them, and they worked hard to try to get rid of Moses. At first, the Pharaoh tried to get the midwives to do it, but they feared God more than they feared Pharaoh, and they refused to do it. And Pharaoh didn't execute them because God blessed them for standing strong for their faith. Great example. And then Moses also, so then he got the people and the police and the guards of Egypt to grab all the Israelites, babies 2 years and under, because he feared that Moses might be a deliverer, and throw them in the Nile River. Moses' parents put him in a little basket that floated, put him out in the Nile. His sister watched. They had faith that God would somehow have someone rescue him. And of course, he got the best rescue he could possibly get, Pharaoh's daughter. And Moses' mom got rewarded for her faith. She got to raise Moses um, probably till he was weaned or a little after, and paid to do it, and then he became the adopted grandson of Pharaoh. Wow. And I believe, didn't we leave off, uh, and John and I and others were discussing that you can see God's hand in Moses' life, because Moses got probably the best training and education he could have gotten in the ancient world there in Egypt. He certainly couldn't have gotten that with the Israelites, and probably nowhere else in the ancient world. The Egyptians were advanced in algebra, trigonometry, and we believe probably in a lot of other things that aren't clearly passed down to us because of things that happened in the ancient world. You want to elaborate, John?
Well, we were talking earlier about the fire at the Library of Alexandria, and we also were discussing. We were thinking about in the ancient world, for example, in Egypt, that they still cannot duplicate the machinery necessary to lift the size and weight of those hand-cut stones to build the pyramids, and they're so well cut that you can't even get a penknife in between the cracks. A lot of it's worn away now, but still, there's a lot there that you can see that how intricate they are, how well made, and how they fit together. But no one's ever been able to duplicate it in today's engineering, which I think is quite fabulous.
Also, in embalming, which is chemical stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I'm not sure they do what like we do it now, but they were with King Tut and some of the others. They were able to chemically embalm the bodies of these kings, and some of them survived like 3 to 4 thousand years. And I don't think any embalming today can do that. Now, I'm not, we're not quite sure what they did. No, they sucked out some of the intestines and stuff. But whatever they did, it was advanced chemistry for its day. So they were smarter. And all we're saying is Moses was put in a very elite place to be.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Could I interject something here?
Sure.
you're talking about they said, Moses said, a prophet like me, God will raise up, and listen to him. And then when you come to the New Testament, to the chapter 17 of Matthew, about the transfiguration, where Jesus took Peter, James, and John, they went up to the big high mountain, and he was transfigured before them. And behold, there appeared unto them Moses and Elias talking with Jesus, the three of them in this vision. And so on, Peter starts talking, of course, he's impetuous. But verse 5 says, while he was yet speaking, behold, a bright cloud overshadowed them, and behold, a voice out of the cloud which said, this is my beloved Son, in whom I am well pleased. He said, you hear him. Moses represented the law, and Elijah was represented the spiritual side, the ministry, or the law, keeping of it, the church. And here God is saying, this is my Son. You listen to him. He takes precedence over these older prophets here. This is the final prophet. Remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I like that one.
And while we're looking at the parallels, one parallel, we could read Hebrews 3, and maybe we should, but one of the parallels is that Moses set the physical model, and Christ was the spiritual fulfillment. That is, Moses, we may talk about the plagues maybe in part 2 whenever we get around to it, but Moses was the one who led the Israelites in the Passover. On the Passover night, the Israelites killed the lamb and put the blood on the doorpost. And everybody got inside, the house with the blood on the doorpost before nightfall. And then at night, the death angel came and passed over them, and all the firstborn except under the lamb. Well, we realize that that's simply a model, ultimately, for the whole world, which will eventually be converted. Most will make it. The whole world will someday be under the lamb, the blood of the true lamb. In other words, when God looks at us, he doesn't see our sins. He sees the sacrifice of Jesus Christ, his blood. And so the death that we deserve passes over us. But that model was led by Moses. That's what I'm just saying. It's like step 1 is Moses and the fulfillment is Christ. But it's an interesting parallel for Moses to be put into. And the Passover is so important, you'll see it in Numbers 9:11, that it's the only ceremony that if you have to miss it, sickness, travel, whatever, you have to make it up. No other holy day is like that. It's special. And we could, by the way, in Exodus 7, verse 1 and 2, it shows the Egyptians perceive Moses as if he were a god. I'll just read Exodus 7, 1 and 2. Exodus 7, 1 and 2. So the Lord said to Moses, see, I've made you as God to Pharaoh, and Aaron your brother shall be your prophet. Anyway, then he goes on and goes on details that God just worked it out that Pharaoh and the Egyptian people looked up to Moses to that extent. And obviously, it's kind of the same parallel. And when he brings those plagues on Egypt, it's as if he's God, and he brings them in and lifts them, and brings them and lifts them. It's a great analogy, great story on just the importance of Moses. And I thought maybe while we're looking at the importance of Moses, maybe we should read Hebrews chapter 3, 1 to 6, and we can talk about it, because this is a New Testament scripture, and now obviously Paul is writing to Christians who are wavering in their faith, and he's trying to show Moses is the one that the Jewish people look up to so much. He's saying, yes, he's important, but Christ is the real thing. So Hebrews 3:1-6 reads, "Therefore, holy brethren, partakers of the heavenly calling, consider the apostle and high priest of our confession, Christ Jesus, who was faithful to him who appointed him, as Moses also was faithful in all his house." So again, he's making that parallel between Christ and Moses. "But this one has been counted worthy of more glory than Moses, inasmuch as he who built the house has more honor than the house. For every house is built by someone, but he who built all things is God. And Moses indeed was faithful in all his house as a servant." In other words, Moses was a servant to God, "for a testimony of those things which would be spoken afterward. But Christ as the son over his own house." But Christ actually owned the house, and Moses was just the chief servant, "whose house we are if we hold fast the confidence with the rejoicing of the hope that's firm to the end." And so he's obviously showing Moses was important and faithful, but Christ is the real most important thing. And I believe many of these Jewish Christians were under heavy persecution and pressure from their Jewish friends and relatives and business associates. And since they could say, well, we're not going back to rank heathen paganism like the Gentiles, we can just maybe go back to Judaism. And he's saying, no, Judaism was kind of like, and Moses was like the training wheels on a bike, important, but the fulfillment is Christ. And he's trying to keep them from going backwards, and because they looked up to Moses so much. And I think, I think I can understand how people can be, and we may live to see it too, how people can be pressured to want to quit.
Yeah, like that woman we were talking about earlier.
Mm-hmm. What were you saying about her, Kelly?
What I was saying was that I read that one of her deputies, that one of the deputy clerks, was talking about how they agreed with her and thought that what she was doing was the right thing, but then they turned around and she said that, but I have a family, I have a husband, I have bills, I have financial obligations, and so in one breath she was saying what Kim was doing was correct and standing in her faith, but then the other lady didn't have the faith to take the same stand, that she let other things come first before God. And I thought that was one of the things with Moses, that the scripture in Hebrews chapter 11, verse 25, it says, "Choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season." That, Moses kind of made the same choice, which we all do, is you either choose God or you choose the world. And, Moses was, as we were talking about, was living an Egyptian life with all the luxury that entailed, and education and knowledge, and he gave all that up to, go with and be with the people of God. And that was a choice that he made. And I'm sure that he had to count the cost the same way we have to count the cost before we choose to follow God. And, I think an example of that is Kim Davis, who is standing her ground in her beliefs of God's truth and, not agreeing to do homosexual marriages. And yet there's someone else right with her who considers themselves to be a good Christian, yet confessing that, she doesn't put God first because she lets the other things change her mind as to what she's doing. And I think it's just a
fear drive rather than her faith.
Right. And that, being human and looking at Moses and things, I can kind of see, what the decision was that he made. I mean, how great a decision that was. And I find it interesting that in John chapter 5, that Christ refers to Moses and says, chapter 5, verse 45, Do not think that I will accuse you to the Father. There is one that accuseth you, even Moses, in whom you trust. For had you believed Moses, you would have believed me, for he wrote of me. But if you believe not his writings, how shall you believe my words? I mean, here's Christ giving authenticity to Moses' writings, and what's saying, what Moses wrote was true, and he wrote of me. And it says that if you don't believe Moses, if you don't believe the writings, if you don't believe the Old Testament, how can you possibly believe my words? Which again, if you're looking at the contrast of Moses and the law, which everybody or a lot of mainstream Christianity teaches is done away with. That's old. That's history. It doesn't have any bearing. And yet Christ says here that if you don't believe those writings, then how can you possibly understand His words, which is what people say the New Testament is?
Yeah, the Bible, New Testament speaks very highly of Moses. I was thinking, let's look at it from Moses' point of view. If you were counting cost, Moses had probably, he'd probably been brought up in palaces his whole life, no doubt with a certain amount of servants, good food, maybe some unclean, but still, compared to most people, luxury foods and probably wine and who knows what all else, privileges and people saying, yes, sir, or whatever they said to people in the royal family, all that special attention, and apparently he was successful among the royal princes. Now, you see what he was giving up, and what could the nation of Israel offer him? Suffering. That's what I'm saying. Suffering.
Yeah.
But Moses was smart enough to realize that a little short-term suffering now that's going to produce eternal rewards later was more valuable than short-term pleasure now, which will, and all sinful pleasure has its kickbacks and stuff, like hangover, and then destruction in the end, because it is more valuable. So actually Moses made a logical decision, but it wouldn't have been an easy one, and it wouldn't have been easy to see if you didn't have the vision. What do you think, Kelly?
No, I agree. And if you look at it in today's terms, society is all about the immediate fix. We want it right now. We want it as fast as we can get it. If I push a button, I want an instant reaction. We don't want to wait for anything, so we don't look at the long term. And so, to again be put in a position where you have to make a choice between God's way and the world's way, people tend to choose the world's way because there's an immediate result to that. Because choosing God's way, there's not an immediate result because we're investing in the future, just like Moses did in looking to the future. And, that's, again, is something that's harder to do in our time because everybody is looking at the immediate feedback.
And even though Moses did have some difficult times with those carnal Israelites, I'll bet you when all was said and done, the years he lived with the Israelites and up in the mountain was probably better and happier for him than if he had lived 50, 60 years in the...
No, I think goes without saying that it most definitely was. I mean, to be living God's way always has a better outcome than living the world's way.
And I was thinking about, maybe you read this scripture a couple of weeks ago, Kelly, but it was John 3:16. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten Son, that whosoever believes in him should not perish. It's interesting how they quote that verse, but they never emphasize the word perish. Because if, assuming Moses never repented, etc., he would have perished. But instead he had everlasting life. And I guarantee you, just from that mountain thing that you mentioned, Moses will be at the top of God's family in the resurrection. I don't know how top, but he'll be near the top, maybe one of the top 2 or 3, Abraham, and maybe throw in somebody like Daniel, but he's going to be up there in the top 2 or 3, I almost guarantee you.
I would think so.
I didn't hear everything you gentlemen said when I was trying to make sure we were back live, but something else occurs to me in the parallels. Moses stood between God and the Israelites on a few occasions, trying to help them out, trying to say, please don't wipe everybody out, please, and Christ steps in for us. After what he did on the state, after he taken that horrid death he had to go through, he stands in for us before our Father and says, "Hey, please give him another shot." And he does a similar thing that Moses did for the Israelites. Another parallel. Like I said, if you mentioned it, I'm sorry, but if you didn't, that just occurred to me when we were talking.
No, we didn't mention it. It's a good parallel. We didn't mention it that Moses stood between God's death and the Israelites, just like Christ stands between, we won't call it spiritual Israelites, which will eventually include everybody in the world, and the death penalty. But Moses had played that role.
Yep.
Which is quite a role to play if you think about it. That's how much God loved Moses, that for Moses' sake, he didn't wipe him out. I mean, maybe God had other reasons, but that was probably the first and prime reason, was Moses.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of amazing when you think about it. And I believe God had prepared Moses all of his young life. And as we mentioned before, in Hebrews, well, I want to go to the reluctant prince, but Moses was known a very strong and confident man. When he went to rescue the Israelite that he saw being abused by the Egyptians, and probably at that point, I'm guessing this, something clicked in Moses, and he said, here they are abusing my people. I just can't be a part of this. And he took on the guard. I'm not even sure Moses meant to kill the guard. He probably meant to teach this guy a lesson. And the guard probably said, so wait a minute, I beat these people all the time. Who cares about them? You can't stop me. I got rights from whatever, I can do anything I want to them. And that was too much for Moses. And Moses probably was a mighty warrior, probably hand-to-hand combat or small weapons. And the way it's written up, like it was no great challenge, Moses just did him in. And thought he hit the body, but obviously he later found out it was known. And he escaped Egypt. And it brings me to the second part of it, and that's all in Exodus 2, 11, 12, and 16, 18. But
it just shows you the movie. We talked about the movie and how good the movie. It was a good movie, but how much they have wrong. I mean, they show Moses as being expelled from or banished from Egypt, not running. Not fleeing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's true. They got something's wrong. We were just saying, I thought casting Charlton Heston as Moses is one of the, generally Hollywood, they always cast people to play Bible characters who don't fit the Bible description. But Charlton Heston, don't you think he looks the part?
Yeah, well, I mean, who I think of.
Oh yeah.
Because he played a tough guy in the movies, but also a leader. I mean, and they aged him in the movie well, from the young Charlton Heston to the older Moses. I mean, I thought Hollywood did a real good job.
Mm.
And by the way, this hand shook Charlton Heston's hand. I love telling the story. I met him at our camp in the Central Highlands of Vietnam, and he said, "Oh, it's an honor to meet you, Lieutenant Rickson." Anyway, I said the same thing. Anyway, I won moment of fame. I met Moses. Anyway, but he was a powerful man and really a great leader. We haven't gotten to that part of the story. Maybe we'll get to it later. But if you compare him to Aaron, Aaron knew that golden calf was bad too. But the mob could play Aaron. Mm-hmm. But they couldn't play Moses. Even though he was humble, he was also very, what word am I thinking of? Determined. John?
He was humble, but he wasn't weak. He was a strong man.
Yeah, he was assertive. He knew it. He wasn't gonna get. Yeah,
Mhm.
he was confident.
Bold. And they probably knew immediately. Moses has come back. Things are going to change. It's like his presence changed things immediately. And so you get some idea of the kind of person he was. And the one topic that I'd like to talk about a little bit, and we can, of course, go back and forth, other things about Moses, was that when you look at the young Moses, when you get into his calling in Exodus, Exodus 3, and then Exodus 4, and I'll just read a little of it. But when you get to his calling, one of the things that amazes you is how reluctant. It's like when he was 40, he might have been willing to do it, maybe. But when he's 80 and more wiser, but still a fairly strong man, at age 80, he was reluctant to be God's prophet and spokesperson. And it's kind of amazing. And here's the pattern that I've noticed in the Bible, with few exceptions. Whenever God calls a prophet to do some great miraculous thing, like tell the entire nation it's wrong, and almost always they're reluctant at first. And even the minor prophets, they'll say such things as, I'm not good enough, I'm too young, I'm not a good enough speaker, or I'm not from priestly families, I'm just a working man, a farmer, or a sheep herder. And of course, God knows who he wants. None of those excuses go anywhere with God. But I just think it's amazing. I've met, several, but one not too many years ago came to our church and then visited my home, and his appearance was horrible. But I don't want to put anybody down based on their appearance. But he, his statement to me, I'm a prophet from God, and God would never send somebody you expect that you should listen to, so you should listen to me. And actually, eventually, he went off and whatever. He got his own website and enlisted his name, Prophet of God. So he eventually got the title and gave it to himself. But mostly, when you meet people who claim they're prophets, they're, from several that I've met, they're mentally unbalanced. Mm-hmm. Have you noticed that?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, a number of times around the years.
Yeah.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
Well, one of the things I find interesting it seems like that when God calls someone, like Moses, he says, who am I? I'm a nobody. That I would go before Pharaoh, and I would be somebody that would bring out the children. I can't do these things. I can't do this. And it's almost like a learning curve. It's like at first they're reluctant and don't want to do it because they know themselves. They're like, I'm not this person. I can't do this. But that's exactly why God wants them, is because they can't do it. He has to do it. And I think that's when they grow, is when they realize that it's not them doing it, it's God doing it through them, and they're just the tool, and God's the one doing all the work. And so it's really not them, it's God. And I think that's the key, because some people that they think that God calls them, but they think they're doing it. They're thinking that God has called them to do it, and they don't realize there's a difference between them doing it and God doing it through them.
Mm-hmm.
And
right.
it takes humbleness to understand that. And I think through this with Moses and the others that were reluctant, it's because they truly knew who they were, that they were not this person that could do this. As you were talking about the difference between Moses and Aaron. And I almost look at Aaron as being politically correct kind of person, and Moses being politically incorrect.
Oh, and speaking about Aaron, I'm going to read Exodus 4:10 just a second. Now, this whole section in Exodus 3 and Exodus 4 is Moses resisting in Exodus 4:10. Moses said to of the eternal God, "Oh my God, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I'm slow of speech and slow of tongue." Now, some translators say, and it's possible, that Moses hadn't spoke the Egyptian tongue in 40 years, and maybe he was a little slow in doing it, and maybe, he was a little slow in tongue. Also, even though he may have heard Hebrew in his very early life, he wasn't around it enough that he was really, really good with the Hebrew language, or at least slow in saying it. Where Aaron was a very eloquent speaker, like a really good politician. Right, Kelly?
Yes.
But Moses had the character, and Aaron didn't.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Yeah.
And then he goes on to say, so the Lord said to him, "Who has made man's mouth, and who makes the mute, the deaf, or the seeing, the blind? Have not I the Lord? Now therefore go, and I'll be your mouth, and teach you what to say." But he said, "Oh my Lord, please send by the hand of whomever else you may send." And God got mad at him and said, "Well, okay, I'm going to bring Aaron, your brother, and he'll go. He'll be your spokesman." I'll read the last part of it. "And I know that he can speak well, and look, he is also coming out to meet you. When he sees you, he'll be glad in his heart." Somehow God predicted some of Moses' opposition and had Aaron on his way just in case he needed him. And probably Aaron, as an older man living in Egypt all those years, probably good, definitely in Hebrew, but probably in Egyptian as well. But I started
splitting the duties like that might have helped to keep Moses humble as well, because it was kind of a split duty. It wasn't all on his shoulders that way. It might have helped keep him humble.
Mm-hmm. It probably worked out well. Aaron says, "Well, this comes from the great Moses who got it from the great God. If you all don't let us go, you will have nothing but lice tonight," or something like that. Yeah, however it works, and then they throw up the dust in the air and it all becomes lice, and everybody's screaming and itching and hollering. But you get some idea that Moses was not in the beginning the eager person he was. And I was thinking about Kim Davis also. I don't know all of her situation and everything about it, but one thing that bothers me about the whole thing is I know that she's being jailed because it's politically incorrect to go against the gay marriage thing. But you realize it's judicial activism. All the elections, even in California, when they asked people to vote on redefining marriage, people voted no.
Twice.
Judges, twice. Judges, judicial activism is not through legislature, have pushed this. And that is wrong. Mm-hmm. And what do you all think of the fact that and some of the judges in the Supreme Court, at least two of them, I'm told, had performed, even when it was not legal, so it was maybe just a quasi-legal, they had performed gay marriages, and they didn't recuse themselves from voting on the decision. So it's like, as we get more radical judges, they're going to be putting into law on their own more radical things. Will we, as Christians, be put in the position that Kim Davis is in the future?
I think so.
Ken?
Keep preaching Romans 1, and you find out real quick. Keep preaching the truth of God from Romans 1, and you're going to, eventually they're going to tap on your door and haul you out. If you live in California, it's already against the law.
Wow. So, how did they get that against the law in California?
Welcome to Jerry Brown land, okay? It's the Democrats, it's the progressive leftist idiots out here. And
Mr. Moonbat himself.
Yes, it is considered a hate crime So when I preach Romans 1:28 against homosexuality, which I do quite often and very vociferously, they can come in and take me out and charge me with a hate crime, a felony. And probably, and as my son-in-law said to my daughter, you're going to come get your dad and haul him off. And my daughter says he doesn't care, because we have to stay with the truth. But let me ask you this Kim Davis thing, when do you remember anyone in America that was ever put in jail without bail for their Christian belief?
I would think this would be the first time it's ever happened.
This is number one. Number one.
It's going to get worse. I recently had we had planned on doing a baptism, and we were meeting at a local hotel, and we have done baptisms at this hotel before, and but we always let them know and ask if it's okay. And this time there was a lot of hesitation, and they finally come back and told us that we couldn't because they were quite full. And this is what they told us. They said, because of our other guests, we are afraid that it would offend them. And I usually don't get too riled up, but I got pretty riled up because it just ran all over me that you would suggest that a religious ceremony would be offensive to someone. And I was like, well, what about my feelings? But it dawned on me that as time goes on, we meet at these hotels, that people walk up and down the hallway. And I've given a couple of strong sermons here lately, especially against homosexuality, that if someone's walking by and hears that preaching, and they go to the front desk and they complain, the time is coming when the management of the hotel will start telling us and say, I'm sorry, but we can't have you all meet here anymore. Because
I expect that. I expect that
You can take that to the bank.
Yeah.
Yep.
Well,
we're up in a area of the country that has a large concentration of religious organization that is not Christian, and I guarantee you, if they hear that walking by, that it will not go over well.
Yes.
Yeah.
We baptized a man in Nashville. I guess it's about 6 years ago, could have been 5 years ago, at a motel pool, and we asked the people just hop out for just a few minutes, and they were eager to do it. We baptized him, and the people around the pool applauded. It was Nashville now. I was so proud of them. It was maybe 6 years ago. They applauded. I'm wondering now if we would get a totally different response. Has America changed that much in 5-6 years?
I think it's moving that way. I know we did a baptism, and we always, we go out to the pool and we say, would you mind giving us the pool for a few minutes? We're going to do a baptism, and we've never had any problem. People have always gotten out of the pool and standing over the side, and after it's over with, we say thank you for letting us, giving us the pool. And we've had people walk up. There was one family walked up and said, we said we're sorry we interrupted your swim time. They go, oh no, thank you. I am so glad that my child got to see this.
That's nice.
And so, we need those kind of responses. I've not had anybody come up and say, this offends me. And again, it's the perceived idea that somebody might think it's offensive. And, it's going to get worse as time goes on, to where, people will begin to, say, I'm not getting out of the pool. Why do I get a pool for your silliness?
I heard something about this, but didn't hear all of it on Christian radio. Last week there was a high school football game. It might have been in Alabama or Georgia. I think it was Alabama. And they're not allowed to pray. The coach is not allowed to pray. So they had everybody in the stadium and the band on their own, according to all prayed, and the band played Amazing Grace. And then they had a baptismal thing on the side, and one of the, I don't know how it worked out, got baptized, and the people applauded. Well, apparently, the minister who did that, somebody called, and they hauled him off to jail. I assume he's out on bail now, but I heard that. I haven't heard any backup on that, any repetition, whether it's true or not, but I've never heard of somebody getting in trouble with the police for public baptism.
Well, it
I
was
guess
there was a school. I don't
him
remember.
own
It was just a couple of days ago, and it was that I seen the news article. I'm trying to find it here. But yeah, it was before practice or something, or before
Yeah.
a football game. They baptized a few. Here it is. School district investigates mass baptism at football practice. Is that what you're talking about?
something like that. I didn't catch
Yeah.
all the details. I never heard of
The school is investigating it, but I didn't see in the article where it says they arrested anybody. This was from September 2nd is when this article was posted. But can you imagine just what's to investigate? It's people got baptized. What's to investigate?
And I
And
know
you know what? It's not the people. It's not the people out there. The people at the pool don't care. The people at the pool, like you said, are probably mostly respectful and understand. It's the people in positions that are afraid of losing their jobs or losing this or losing their, like the people at the school district. If you ask them in a closed room, they probably would not, it didn't bother them a bit, and they wouldn't mind a bit, but they're afraid of the perception. They're afraid of what society as a whole, or as what the media or what some progressive is going to do to them. It's crazy because still 70-some or 80% of the population still consider themselves Christian. If that was the case, none of this stuff would get legs. But everybody in any place of power has bullied. These are the people that claim to be anti-bullying. These progressives, these commies, are bullying everybody into falling into their line and believing their way. We are letting fear, or the country is letting fear guide them, not their faith, not their being an American, not their American pride. Only thing fueling their reaction is fear of persecution and prosecution, and it just gets these people are being able to enforce their narrative, their laws, or their feelings on us, on the majority, by sheer by fear. A fear of losing your job, you're this or you're that, or you're losing face with society. And people are not standing together to shut it down.
Could I make a suggestion?
Yes.
What we do here is, let me get this out of my ear there. Maybe that'll stop the feedback. I don't know. But what we do is, if you have a Church of God Seventh Day locally, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yep. Yes, we can hear you. We can hear you.
Okay. If you have a Church of God Seventh Day locally, go meet the pastor if you don't already know him. And since our roots come out of the same from way back when, and what we do here and have done for all the time we've been in existence, we have a baptism. I just go over to that minister and say, hey, we've got a couple here, or a couple of people who would like to be baptized. Is it okay if I use your baptism tank or your baptistry? Say, Monday evening about 6, 7 o'clock. Sure. And here it's a baptistry that's all got water. It's all heated water and everything else. It's all set up for that purpose. But my point is, it's private. It's Church of God Seventh Day. It's a Sabbath-keeping church. They, where we all came from eventually through Mr. Armstrong. They understand, and it takes all the publicity out there. You're not out in the public. It's just something that's worked for us, and I just pass it on to anybody that might be listening.
Yep, that's a good point. And if that's available, then sure, we should. That's an option for us. There's plenty of options, I think. If we have to, you can always go down to your farm store and buy a tank if you need to, or something. But that's what them people did at the school district. I think they had some kind of tubs or tanks they used. But it's going to get to the point where I don't know. It's not looking good that a few tiny people are running everybody else. They're running everybody else's lives, and they're getting away with it.
Apparently, that might have been in Wisconsin, and apparently they were saying that few people in the coast got baptized, I guess, with a portable baptism on the field. Oh, and the field was owned by the school property, and so later people wanted, I guess, the police come and investigate it. Apparently, they said we did it right before practice. Take a look and see how God is still in our schools. That's what they thought. But others are investigating them now, and they may get in trouble for it. But everybody keeps talking about the letter that Jefferson wrote saying that there should be a wall between church and state. If you read his letter, what he was, of course, that's not in the Constitution's letter. That letter, he was referring to protecting the church from the state, not the reverse of that. He was protecting the Danbury Baptist Church from the government. And a lot of people get it backwards. They think we're protecting the government and its influences from religion. No, they always assume that religion would have a moral influence on the people. And, you know, Jefferson used the Bible as a textbook when he was in charge of the Washington, D.C. school district as president. So, you know, the idea that religion was foreboding for the public is those guys who wrote the Constitution would be turning over in their grave. That's simply a modern twisting or misinterpretation of it. His letter was to protect the church from the influence of the government, which they saw in England, not the other way around. And nobody knows that.
Nope. And you know what part of the problem is? What we're up against is lawyers and linguists. Some of the leading progressives in this whole mess are linguists. They're experts at the English language. They know how to twist things. They know how to change the language. In other words, illegal immigrant, you can't say that. You have to change. They change it to something less that shines the light less on what they're actually doing. Anytime there's a term or like anchor baby or whatever it is they're talking, anytime there's a term that shines the light on what they're trying to get away with, they change the language so that term is not not good. It's not a good term. They make you feel guilty about using it. They change the language. And it's just, that's what you said is just another example of twisting the facts or changing the language around to fit their narrative, to shut your observation of what they're actually doing down, to soften it.
One PR textbook writer, he called it semantic tyranny.
That's good description of it.
Semantic tyranny. You're Islamophobe or all those other phobes. You can't think anything. And one I heard the other day I thought was a bit interesting. He said, "You're hiding behind the Bible. Oh, what a hateful thing to do." Isn't that shocker? You're hiding behind the Bible.
Well, they're hiding behind Satan is what they're doing.
And I'm sure most people thought, well, he's right. These people that don't agree with us are hiding behind the Bible. What a terrible thing to do. Instead of what's politically correct right now.
Right. I don't know. It's amazing what a small group of people have been able to do to one of the once greatest countries on the face of the earth. It's amazing.
I just hope that we can be strong and smart. I mean, you don't want to be dumb and get yourself persecuted unnecessarily, but there will come times when we probably need to do the right thing and not compromise. And it may not be as easy as it sounds, you know.
Yep, no, it's going to be difficult, and human nature is probably going to be a huge draw to get you to not do what you should be doing. Fear is an overwhelming thing and can be crippling and can, jerk people out of their faith. But there's examples in the Bible, all throughout the Bible, on what what standing your ground does. We just got to keep our eye on what is at the end of this, and what, especially once you're in the church and once you're baptized, what you stand to lose. And what Kelly was saying earlier about counting the cost is, well, you've done that, so you're in this. You're not. This is not a. There's no out. There's no back door to this. You're in, and you have to realize that. And even modern day examples like this Kim that we're talking about, and that girl in Columbine where the butchers stuck a gun to her face and said, "Do you believe in Jesus?" And she said yes, and they shot her. I mean, we have examples, and we need to make sure that our head is clear, and that, if things get like that, that we don't make any mistakes.
And just think about Moses. He's now one of the top people in God's kingdom, and when the resurrection comes, will be forever and ever and ever. Or he could have been just another decadent prince living so many decadent years in Pharaoh's palace.
Mm-hmm.
Yep, and he stood against the most powerful man on the face of the earth.
Yep. With
God behind him. We got to remember who's behind us.
Yep, it always comes down to choosing.
Yep, and we also got to remember that was it Elisha where he opened his servant's eyes. He asked God to open his servant's eyes to see who's really surrounding him, the legions of angels that were on their side during that battle. We got to remember. We got to think of that. Remember that.
It's amazing. Moses became, and even Pharaoh, I think, and others, they probably wanted to do Moses in after some of those plagues, but they were afraid. I think that God gave Moses power that they had to respect. Moses became quite something because he trusted God.
Yep. Is there any more recent news you guys want to talk about? We ran over, but we started late because of the glitch. I hate the word glitch, but hey, it was a glitch. I don't know how else to explain it.
One small thing that I noticed that we might have mentioned it, but I didn't notice before. I was watching one of those historical document programs, and Japan, when they had the recession in 1930, before that they had their own little fledgling democracy. After that, it was chaos and riots in the street with all the poverty. And the emperor asked the army to bring order, and they don't have as many details as they do about Hitler. But basically, Japan turned to Hideki Tojo, who was called the Razor. I guess he was one of those really sharp military types called the Razor. And Japan turned directions. They became more imperialistic, more militaristic after the Depression, and at least that got them out of the Depression, just like with Germany. Well, if the Chinese stock market continues its trouble, some experts say America will survive it with some damage, but we'll get through it. But Far Eastern countries, the Pacific Rim, they're going to be really hurt hard. Maybe if they're going to go into recession, that may push them into be more militaristic. And in Revelation 9, there's a verse that talks about a 200 million man army from the east that's in that great battle in the end. That army could come from nowhere but the Far East. China, Japan, Korea, Malaysia, maybe a few other surrounding countries join them, and you could get an army that big, especially 4 or 5 years from now. China might be up to 2 billion by then.
Yep.
So maybe these economic troubles that are starting are the beginning, and they may take a few years to fulfill, a prophecy of a great Eastern military power, and we still expect, as you said, King of the North, King of the South too, to come about eventually. And this nuke deal with Iran may just stir the pot that may push things faster. Maybe. Yep. We'll have to wait and see.
Hey, and one more thing. I looked in our first 15 minutes worth of video is gone. It just disappeared. There's nothing there. So why don't you, instead of we didn't get the joke in at the beginning, why don't you end us out on a joke tonight?
Okay. And remember, next weekend we're going to talk about proof that the holy days should be obeyed by New Covenant, New Testament Christians. And I think people, and trumpets, of course, as well. People should look forward to seeing that next weekend. Carlson was charged with stealing a Mercedes-Benz, and after a long trial, he hired the best lawyer he could get. And this guy really did his thing, and the jury acquitted him. Later that day, Carlson came back to the presiding judge at the hearing and said, "Your Honor, I want to get out a warrant for that dirty lawyer of mine." "Why? He won your case. You got acquitted." He said, "Yes, I know, but I didn't have the money to pay his fee." So you know what he did? He went and took the car I stole.
Oh,
I give it.
on that note, we're going to say goodnight, everyone.
Good night. Have a good Sabbath.
Yep, everyone have a wonderful Sabbath, and we'll see you here again next week.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night.
We're happy you could make it. So glad you are here, and hope that we've been able to make God's word more clear. Until next time, may God be with you in everything you try. But for now, till next week, we have to say goodbye.
Happy Sabbath, everyone.